Café and Networking Podcast promotes business owners, business experts throughout the world. I'm Tom Reaoch, known as the King of Networking, connecting people from my unique communication lab in Brazil. Today we talk with Pamela M. Covington. She's joining us from Atlanta, Georgia. Pamela M. Covington is a speaker and storyteller at Apex Dawn Group. Years ago, through no fault of her own, she plummeted from a comfortable middle-class lifestyle into one of deep poverty. Now she's an anti-poverty advocate and author of A Day at the Fair, One Woman's Welfare Passage. So Pamela, what insight can you share with listeners regarding dealing with fear?
Hey, first, thank you, Tom, for inviting me to speak with you today. In terms of fear, initially, I ask everyone to envision, if they will, that word spelling, F-E-A-R. Many people have said that fear stands for false evidence appearing real. I see it as several other ways. One is fear, being that you forget everything you know and run, F-E-A-R, forget everything and run. But you can win if you will face everything and instead rise. So that's face everything and rise. And these are things that I learned during a very difficult portion of my life. As Tom mentioned, I had gone from living a very comfortable lifestyle into unimaginable poverty. I mean, initially, my children and I were living very comfortably, but because of my partner suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, at some point I had to make the toughest decision I've ever made in my life to this day. And that was to leave the most sensitive, talented, loving man I've ever cared about. And it was tough. It was not just tough financially, it was extremely tough emotionally, but it was something that I had to do for the sake of my and my children's safety.
And that's fear.
Yes. So I didn't know where we're going to go or how we would manage after we got wherever we were going to go, but I had to take it upon myself and leave. And the fear that could have taken me over, I would remind myself why I was doing what I was doing. I didn't want to just scatter about and not have a plan. Initially, that's pretty much what it ended up being. My children and I initially were homeless for 5 days, 6 nights. And I was driving around in a moving truck that was costing me 40 cents a mile, fritting away the precious dollars that I managed to accumulate on hotel rooms, on eating out, and we were getting down to nothing. And I had to realize that I couldn't continue on like that, or I would never have the money that would be needed to secure an apartment and pay the first month rent and security deposit. I have strong feelings about fear, and I'm going to share 2 examples of. One is where I first face everything and rise. And another one is where I just forgot everything I knew about life and principles and surviving, and I ran. The first one is this was in the early 80s. I was an avid vinyl collector. I still have 14 record albums to this day and a turntable. Well, I had moved from Buffalo to Savannah, Georgia, and when I got an opportunity to unpack my albums and my turntable, I was excited. I'm going to put some music on and christen this house, and it's going to be home being home. Well, when I turned my turntable on after I picked out some of my favorite tunes, it wasn't doing anything. It wasn't responding. It wasn't going around. It had power. And I tend to be somewhat technically inclined, but instead then I was fearful. I'm like, oh no, I can't go and take this thing apart. What if I can't put it back together right? So for 6 months, I lived in that little cottage with the sound of silence, all because I was fearful. Then one day I said, doggone it, where's the Phillips screwdriver? I took it over and very gently handled it, disassembled it. And all that it was, Tom, was the belt had slipped off from the platter. So because of fear, for 6 months, I suffered without music.
That's the challenge. No, I agree with you. And when we have fear, we sort of we start building walls, and we don't take walls down. And that you could sit around for 6 months trying to create a home and looking at a turntable that's not turning. And that becomes even more depressing. So overcoming fear is overcoming depression.
Yes, yes. So that was my forget everything and run. Now, facing everything and rising occurred when I was living in a poverty situation and had decided after settling down and adjusting to my new, life in a crime-ridden, drug-infested neighborhood. Once I settled down, I decided, what was I going to do? I went back to school. And during that time, I had a professor who helped me realize something that I never thought anything of. I turned in a paper one day, and the next day in class, he called me and said, hey, would you be sure and come and see me after class? I said, boy, that paper must have really been bad. But quite the contrary. Right. He says to me, I can see him holding the paper, Pamela, this is great. He says, it's got a few weak spots here and there, but this is fantastic. He said to me, a poverty-stricken individual, he said, you could turn words into dollars. I practically cried on my way home that day. My children and I were living in a cement box of roaches with no air conditioning, no heat. We had no stove for 8 months, and we didn't have a refrigerator for 3 months. I mean, when I say poor, I mean poor. On a good day, I cooked Vienna sausages and grits on top of the kerosene heater I borrowed from. And here somebody's telling me, despite all of this, that I could turn words into dollars. Right. I ended up doing an unpaid internship because of him. And it led me to do something that just opened my world wide, totally. And that was in the internship. The phone rang, the editor picks up the phone. I can hear her telling somebody, well, we can't spare anybody right now because we're on deadline. And she comes over to my desk and says, hey, it was a newspaper calling, looking for someone to give coverage, they call it stringer reporting, on a story. The story was President Reagan signing the budget for the Trident submarine installation. And I'm like, me, a person with nothing, just barely eking out a living, going to this quaint country town in Georgia to pretend to be a reporter with no press credentials. So initially, guess what? I was scared stiff. I'd asked her, could I have a few minutes and think about it? And she said, sure. I went in the bathroom and had a conversation with myself. And I told myself, listen, you can't turn down that opportunity. You will disappoint yourself. And even more so, you will disappoint my professor, who was my mentor. And so I went about the duty of talking to people in the area about the impact that the submarine coming would have on their area. And I met the nicest gentleman who was a realtor. I said, I'll pick a real estate office. He could talk about impact, I bet. I ended up making friends with the gentleman. He told me, listen, when you're done, you come back. If you want, you can dictate on my phone. That's all we had back in the early 80s. And lo and behold, Tom, the very next day, that same newspaper machine that I used to walk past from the parking lot into the college every day, I stopped at and took 2 of my very precious coins that I saved from my food stamps and pulled that machine open, grabbed that newspaper and almost tore it apart. Where's my name? Where's my name? But then fear got me again because I'm like, oh my God, what if my welfare caseworker sees my name? And I said, you know what? If they do, they'll say something like, oh, that can't be her. She's just another welfare mom.
So that is the secret to success, is not underestimating ourselves.
Yes.
Overcoming fear. Did that lead you to the book?
What led me to the book is some years ago, while still living in Virginia, I got laid off from a job that I had intended to retire out of, but instead was laid off about 14 years in the process. And my girlfriends were feeling so sorry for me. They're like, oh, how are you going to manage? How are you going to this? How are you going to that? Well, to be honest, the first half of this 14 years was excellent, but I had come up under a new supervisor and it was turning really sour. I knew that given my attitude, because of the way things had changed, that if they ever had a layoff, it was going to be me. And so I told them, listen, I'm okay. I'm going to be all right. And they're like, but how can you deal with that? I said, you want to know something? That's nothing compared to what I've been through. You see, all they knew was the Pamela who lived in the big landmark of a house in the neighborhood and had 2 cars and 2 kids, and everything looked like I just had it going on. And I told them my poverty story about what it was like to be in McDonald's with my foot against the door because I'm washing my baby in the sink and somebody might come, hey, I need to use this. You know, they didn't know that I used to steal toilet paper, you know? And so they said, wow, you need to write a book. People need to hear that story. And that's how the book, A Day at the Fair, F-A-R-E, came into being, Tom.
Well, how can our listeners find you and the book?
They can find me by my name everywhere. I'm on Twitter. And my website is www.pamela, Pamela, middle initial M like in Mary, Covington, COV like in Victor, INGTON.com. And they can look me up on LinkedIn as well.
Very good. Well, Pamela, I want to thank you, congratulate you, and thank you for being part of our program today.
Thank you so much for having me, Tom. I truly appreciate it.
Okay, and for our audience, again, they can find more. You could find more about Pamela M. Covington on LinkedIn, as she mentioned, and PamelaMCovington.com, and find the book at PamelaMCovington.com/books. Café and Networking is brought to us by Focus MI Market Intelligence, an agricultural market research specialist in Brazil. More information on the website, FOCUSMI.com. Thanks for listening until the next time here at Café and Networking Podcast.